Welcome to the Card Text, an unofficial mini-podcast about Marvel Champions at the LCG. We cover rules discussions regarding gameplay and aim to help fans of the game better understand the inner workings of their favorite Marvel card game.
Okay, we have a little bit of news this month. We have had unconfirmed reports that the designers are being told that they are no longer allowed to answer rules questions through anything but official channels. Apparently this has come from the organised play department, but yeah, we have no confirmation of that, and we've got no confirmation from any official source of any of it, really.
I would say the information is sort of third-hand information, which means that it could have been misunderstood on some point. But at the same time, there's no reason to, doubt the person was being genuine in what they said.
Aside from that, we did get a bunch of new rulings that we would like to cover. These are rulings that we got, I think, as of yesterday, February 18th, 2021. So the first one I have on my list is that Goliath, the leadership ally, basically works the way that we covered in our ability preview for him on the MCM podcast, right? So if you trigger his ability and he gets removed from play in some way and comes back, you cannot trigger that ability again, and he does not retain the buff that he originally got from you triggering that ability. So it looks like we got that one pretty accurate.
And he does not need to be discarded. In that case, if you brought him back into play, he loses the buff, and he also is no longer required to be discarded at the end of the phase.
And the next one, Marked for Death, side scheme from the Hawkeye Nemesis set. It can return another player's Mockingbird when that side scheme is defeated. The initial search of the Clint Barton player area must fail, though, and another copy of Mockingbird must be played before that side scheme is defeated for this particular result to be possible. And the next ruling we have is Moon Knight, the Moon Knight ally that you get from the Rise of Red Skull. It's a scenario ally. He has an ability that reads spend a wild resource with a cost arrow. So that means you can spend from any source that satisfies this ability. So cards like Eye of Agamotto or a card with a printed wild can be used for that cost on Moon Knight.
This seems to also confirm that it is specifically a wild that you need to spend for those abilities where they're asking you to spend a wild.
I would say the thing I would add to that is that I feel like I agree. It makes it pretty clear that it's supposed to be a wild resource. I do feel like Boggs a little bit didn't address the actual reason for the question, I guess. I think the email maybe didn't explain it, but just that idea that there's nowhere in the rules where it says you can actually generate a wild resource.
I think what it says is that you can actually generate a wild, but you must generate it as some other resource type. So I think it should say like generate a wild resource. It's that you can't spend that resource, right? Do you agree?
You're right. You can generate the wild resource by declaring what type it's going to be. So it would be impossible to actually spend it because it's not wild anymore at the point in time when you're spending it. I'm okay that he didn't address it. I think the way that it works is clear now. And I feel like, whereas before we might have had to kind of couch our answer with 100% sure how this works, we can say fairly confidently we know how it works. There's kind of a little bit of an annoyance that, well, it's not technically what the rules say, but you can kind of live with it.
And the next one, another Marked for Death. Only search the areas marked for death instructs you to. So no other areas need to be searched. Once Marked for Death comes out, it's revealed. Just search the areas that Marked for Death instructs you to. Next ruling was another Marked for Death. So Marked for Death, in some cases, as with the ones previously mentioned, Marked for Death's ability, which returns Mockingbird to hand, will actually return Mockingbirds in play to their owner's hand. So this one we might have to get a little more into the detail on because my synthesis here probably doesn't explain it.
Essentially, there are the situations that you just described where if Mockingbird's not in one of the prescribed areas to search, then she's not placed under Marked for Death. But in that circumstance, she could be in some other area, which then results in her entering play later, or some other Mockingbird could enter play. In any of those cases, then that Mockingbird that's in play at the time when the side scheme is defeated will go back to that player's hand.
Okay, moving on. This is the last one. Temporal shields. So there was initially an answer to the temporal shield versus tough timing question, but I didn't include it, so I just included the one that was corrected. The first one was a misrule. So temporal shield from Kang, it's an attachment, and a tough card if Kang is tough and has temporal shield. Temporal shield triggers on attack and does not have the same timing as the tough card. Temporal resolves before tough. Tough will remain. Remove temporal shield when an attack is initiated on a character with temporal shield.
I think the important point here is that an interrupt to an attack is considered to happen before damage, which is what tough responds to. Tough interrupts the damage, and if that interrupt to an attack prevents damage, then tough never receives the damage that it needs to interrupt.
And so that's all of the very new or very latest rulings that we've had come down from the developers. Much thanks to them for actually going out of their way to answer all that. Hopefully we'll get more.
With the Mockingbird situation, with the situation where someone else has the core set Mockingbird in play, I did find that version of the question. And the question asks, if I'm playing Hawkeye and another player has core set Mockingbird, I get Shadow of the Past. Does the side scheme capture the in-play Mockingbird? And the answer is no. Only the Clint Barton player searches their play area for Mockingbird and puts her under mark for death. If Mockingbird is already in play under another player's control, that Mockingbird will not be placed under mark for death. But what it doesn't say is how to actually resolve the situation.
So what doesn't it address?
What happens for the Clint Barton player's Mockingbird? Assume that Mockingbird is in Clint Barton's deck. He's also in play in some other player's play area.
Right.
Side scheme enters play.
Mm-hmm.
What happens?
Well, I believe what would happen is Clint Barton player would grab that Mockingbird and place her under the side scheme face up. At that point, it pushes out the other Mockingbird, right?
That is one of the scenarios that could happen. The other scenario is that it cannot place Mockingbird under her because she's already in play.
Oh, right.
For example, if I have Mockingbird in my hand and you have Mockingbird in play, I cannot play my Mockingbird. It doesn't work because you can't have two copies of the same unique card in play. So it's possible that the side scheme fizzles out and it can't capture her at all because she's already in play. The issue is that Boggs answered the question that it doesn't capture the Mockingbird that's in play, but I don't see an answer about what's the actual resolution? Is the resolution that nothing happens? Is the resolution that Mockingbird's captured and the other one leaves play? Those were kind of the two scenarios I think that could happen. I feel like all the ones where Boggs gave a clear ruling that Mockingbird does not get placed under the side scheme, she was not in any of the places to find.
Right.
But we don't know what happens if she is in a place to find, but a different Mockingbird is in play. I think it probably fails for the reason that I described before, where if you have Mockingbird in play, you're not allowed to play her.
Because of the unique rule?
That's what I believe happens, but it's just, I think that in spite of us getting 4 marked for death rulings,
Yeah, 4.
none of them addressed that particular scenario. Or someone even addressed the scenario, but they just didn't ask what happened, and he didn't tell us what happens. He just kind of left it at, oh, it doesn't capture the one from play.
So that's still the unknown there.
I mean, that might be the whole thing. It doesn't capture the one from play, so nothing happens. And kind of the way that he addresses it without talking about that leads me to believe maybe, I mean, this is like this is one of those kind of slight beliefs. It's not like this is what he said, but a little bit makes me think that maybe nothing happens. That's why he doesn't say what happens. I would rather he had actually said, verified what actually happens, like it said, and in that case, nothing happens. In that case, Hawkeye's Mockingbird just stays where she's at. Okay, I feel like she should not be captured because of other rules, but really those other rules only address players putting them into play, which makes it so that there's actually this weird scenario that maybe she's captured. Maybe she gets captured from Hawkeye's deck and stays in play for the other player. And, well, rules is written, actually. I think that's what happens because uniqueness rule is not amazing.
We have a ruling about that, though, don't we? A ruling from Caleb. If Mockingbird is in play, you have to put that copy under the side scheme because the unique rule prevents another copy from entering play. While Mockingbird is face up under the side scheme, she is in play but under no player's control. So, yeah, in the situation where another player has core set Mockingbird.
That's the thing. That's the situation that Boggs just addressed, and he said he doesn't capture that one.
Yeah, and so the Mockingbird that is in the Hawkeye player's deck or hand or discard, wherever she is, that can't end up under Mark for Death.
Certainly should not, because of unique rules.
Yeah. Or if it does, then yes, Boggs should have covered that because that would then force the core set one to be discarded.
I mean, I think a lot of the kind of question around this issue is around that idea that the unique rule is written to say the players as a group are permitted to have only one copy of each unique card by title in play. But it doesn't address what happens when that rule attempts to be violated. Like, for example, for the ally limit, right? You're told you're only allowed to have 3 allies in play. But it tells you what happens when that gets violated. If you have more than 3 allies in play, discard till you have only 3. It's good because just being told you can't do something in a card game like this doesn't tell you what happens when that scenario just arises, because sometimes cards tell you to do something and it forces you into a scenario where you are contradicting the rules, which is what this example is, right? That marked for death, it tells you to put Mockingbird under it, which puts you in a scenario where you are now disobeying the uniqueness rule. But the golden rule says you obey the card over the rules. So now you've arrived at an illegal game state. And the rules don't tell you how to resolve that illegal game state. Because the rules never say discard a unique card if you have more than one copy in play. Like if a card just puts 2 unique cards in play, what do? The rules don't say. It's treated as a scenario that's never ever going to happen because you've been told not to do it yourself. That's not exactly how card games work. So, I think that this uniqueness rule is meant to be better than the golden rule, and it says if something tries to deny the unique rule, you just you don't let it happen. But, I don't know.
That would be weird, though, right?
It would be weird.
Scott, have you reconciled that?
No. I think I'm going to send a follow-up question.
Yeah.
And in 6 months' time, we might know the answer.
We might know what actually happens here. I mean, I would be. What I would like is for the RRG to just say, instead of this whole "you're not permitted to have more than one copy of a unique card in play," to just say what happens when more than one unique card tries to enter play. And I mean, I think they could rule that, right? Like they could add that to the unique rule. They could say, if some game elements or cards attempt to put a second copy of a unique card in play, do not resolve that ability. Right? That would be fine. And that's kind of what they did for Taskmaster in the Rise of Red Skull, right? When Shadow of the Past tries to put Taskmaster in play, that puts more than one unique card in play, so just don't do it. And since you didn't do it, it surges. Maybe that'll be part of RG for 5 years when they finally publish it.
Will we see the X-Men before we see 1.4? We hope that was informative. Thanks to Kennedy Hawk and everyone at Marvel Champions Monthly for graciously hosting us. Tune in for our next episode next month on the latest rulings, news, and rules conundrums. Thanks to my distinguished colleagues, Theo Rell and Scott, for joining. And remember, when you would rather not read the rules reference, listen to the card text instead.